It was pitch black, and I felt disoriented, like when you're stumbling around an unfamiliar hotel room in the middle of the night, looking for the light switch. I could tell we were traveling from the sound of the car's tires on the road. My body was being thrown left to right. I was paralyzed with fear. You know that feeling, that sense of dread when you're at the top of a roller coaster, staring down into the abyss. We continued for what seemed like hours, but eventually the sound of the car's tires gave way to the snap of twigs. We stopped. I could hear voices, but I really couldn't make out what they were saying. Why had they brought me here? What were they going to do to me? I was feeling very confused. Suddenly, a beam of light flooded across my face, startling me for a moment. I was paralyzed with fear. Beyond, I could see a dense thicket of trees. I could smell the scent of pine needles, damp leaves. I could see the sun glistening on the horizon. I decided I had to make a run for it. I sprinted from there as fast as I could, lungs burning, branches were whipping in my face. I ran as far and as fast as I could. But when I turned back, the people showed no sign of wanting to follow me. Freedom. Over the next few days and months, I made a home for myself in that forest. I started eking out a living, finding out which foods were edible. Blackberries were definitely a favorite. And also finding where the best places to shelter were, like in the cozy hollow of a fallen log covered in moss. I even met another individual who, like me, had found themselves confused and alone in this forest. Then one day, people returned to our forest. They carried what seemed like guns, and I really felt that trouble was afoot. That sense of fear that I'd felt before resurfaced. I tried to hide, desperate not to be spotted. I was cowering in the hollow of a log. The barrel of a gun was raised in my direction, spotted. Are you feeling confused? Then you might have an inkling of how confused the abandoned pet raccoon is feeling in this story that I'm telling. Yes, thankfully this is not my own personal reflection, but that of an animal that is persecuted in many places. They're known as invasive alien species, and they're animals that are considered to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Many of you might have seen a gray squirrel in Europe, pretty cute little creatures. Or maybe you've been lucky enough to spot a muntjac deer with the little horns, or even an Egyptian goose. Or maybe you've been in Florida and you spotted a lionfish. All of these animals have death warrants out for them because they are considered invasive. Invasive alien species are actually one of the 5 direct drivers of biodiversity loss. But unlike the other drivers, land and sea use change, climate change, pollution, and direct exploitation like hunting, invasive alien species are actually part of biodiversity themselves, so that creates a bit of a conundrum. On top of that, there's increasing research and awareness of animal sentience, their ability to feel fear and pain and pleasure, much like us. Maybe you've seen pictures of that Picasso painted, a very famous pig in South Africa who does painting, or you've heard of the intelligence of octopus. And this means people are becoming more aware of animals' inner processes, and they're becoming more concerned for how we treat invasive animals. The negative language that we use, invasive alien, actually can mean that we use less humane management methods. For example, drowning traps which hold animals underwater, or snares to catch them. And this can mean it takes a really long time for them to die. And these are methods that we would not find acceptable for animals that we think are more valuable to us, like farmed or companion animals. One solution, though, would be reframing the language that we use in policy and practice. For example, these animals could be considered as climate refugees. They can no longer live in their usual habitats. Their food is becoming more scarce. Or maybe they're even victims of trafficking in the exotic pet trade. Perhaps you've seen the slow loris tickling videos, which are pretty cute, to be honest. But a lot of people went out and bought slow lorises. Or maybe you even know about the trend for buying turtles after the TV series Teenage Ninja Mutant Turtles. I think I said it right, but you can tell that I grew up in the 90s. The owners that buy these animals might actually not know how to care for them, and they might abandon them. But being resilient creatures, they might adapt to their new habitat and thrive. But this means that they're considered invasive. In my research, I look at transformative governance and different mechanisms we can use to really radically reshape conservation and think differently. And governance means the processes and the actors and the rules that interact on a particular issue, like invasive alien species. In this case, a transformative approach might even be considering non-human animals as actors in this whole governance system. So maybe the raccoon in this story would even have a say in what happened to her. Transformative governance in practice might also mean thinking of other ways to manage these animals. So in the UK, they're trialing contraceptives with squirrels. Or in Limburg in the Netherlands, there was a group of raccoons considered invasive, so they should be killed, but they were taken into a shelter. This is not necessarily better for the animals in the long run, but it's at least worth considering. And these principles align with new narratives in conservation, like convivial conservation, where humans and other animals live alongside and they coexist in shared landscapes, rather than off-limits protected areas. Or compassionate conservation, where animal individuals, as well as species collectives, are considered to matter morally. Ultimately, many of these animals, these invasive species, are moving around the world because of climate change, because of human activities and trade, and some of these animals are going to settle in their new habitat. And we're going to have to learn to coexist alongside them. So I think a question that we really need to ask ourselves is, what kind of future do we envision? How do we want to live alongside nature?